Aria Aber and Theresia Enzensberger. We are delighted that you're joining us today. Gegenüber is our digital transatlantic magazine, and this event is part of our series Literature Across Borders. 2 more talks are coming up soon. On September 17th, we are presenting New German Voices with 2 young authors from Germany, Sonali Beha and Ivan Jurek Fenker. And October 1st, we'll present a talk on Karl Marx Capital with Paul Reiter and Paul North, and please join us for those events as well. But today we are talking about Good Girl, Aria's debut novel, which she wrote in English, her 3rd language, by the way, and then translated it into German. I have it here. I don't know if you can see it real well. Well, maybe not. Right here. Aria Aber was born and raised speaking Farsi in German and German in Germany, and now she lives in the United States. She started out writing poems, which have appeared in The New Yorker, among other publications. She has also published an award-winning poetry collection, Hard Damage. She teaches creative writing at the University of Vermont and divides her time between Vermont and Brooklyn. And right now she's joining us from Burlington, Vermont. Welcome, Aria. Theresia Enzensberger is joining us from Berlin today, where she works as an author and journalist. Her first novel, Blueprint, about life at the Bauhaus, was published in 2016. At Sea, her 2nd novel was nominated for the German Book Awards, and her most recent publication, Sleeping, is a partly fictional, partly essayistic exploration of insomnia and sleep. Welcome, Theresia. We're really delighted that you're both here, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Karin, for the introduction. Thank you, Goethe-Institut, for hosting this, and obviously thank you, Theresia, and everyone who's in the audience. Before we start, I would like to drop something in the chat. It's a link for donations for Kalam Project. As you may know and have heard in the news, there have been many earthquakes in the east of Afghanistan over the last couple of days, and the number of dead has risen to, I think, 1,200 right now. It's probably a little higher than that even now, as they're counting the dead. Electricity has been cut off, and it's a really, really urgent situation there, and people are in need. So if you have even a tiny bit of money to donate, I think the people there would appreciate it. So I'm going to drop the link for Kalam projects in the chat.
Thank you, Aria. Thanks for dropping the link. And thank you all for being here today. I'm very excited to talk to Aria for the 2nd time about her novel Good Girl, which tells the story of Nila, a young woman in Berlin in the 2010s whose parents fled Afghanistan and who's moving, as the story progresses, between hedonism, self-destruction, and I would say artistic self-discovery. The novel is doing that in a language that I find incredibly vivid and poetic, and I think we should hear that language. So maybe you can read a short passage.
Okay. Thank you. I initially wanted to read the first couple of pages in German and then switch over to English, but because I just moved, I don't have my German copy on me, so it will be the original. And I don't think I need to preface anything right now. It's the first 1.5 pages of the book. My protagonist is, as Theresia said, 19 years old, and it's the summer of 2010. The train back to Berlin took 7 hours, and the towel in my suitcase was still wet from my last swim in the lake, dampening the pages of my favorite books. I took the S-Bahn and then the U-Bahn home to Lipschitzallee and walked past the discount supermarket, the old pharmacy, and the Qurbani bakery with the orange shop cat lounging outside its door. In our building's elevator, an intimate odor assaulted my nostrils. Urine mixed with ash. "Hello, spider," I said, looking at the cobweb in the corner. The ceiling lamp twitched, turning alien the swastika graffiti. My key, fastened by a pink ribbon, turned in the old lock. Nobody was home. I kicked off my shoes. The cat meowed for food, its dander floating in the air. My room was merely all it had been for so many years. A suffocating box with a tiny window, pink sheets, and that Goethe quote I'd painted in golden letters above my desk. The popcorn ceiling seemed lower than before. I wiped the kitchen counters, walked into my parents' bedroom, opened their closet, and pulled out my mother's cashmere frock. Maybe I cried, maybe I didn't. What I did was lie in bed and sleep until dark, covering my face with her dress. It's been over a decade now, but the colors of that summer day are as precise as yesterday. I was 18 when I returned from boarding school, and my sense of melancholy was even more overwhelming than I anticipated. My cousins called me pretentious. The Arab boys who loitered outside the shisha bar sneered at me. You changed, they said, meaning my relative lack of vernacular and my newfound obsession with eyeliner. Back then, I still wanted to be a photographer, a small Olympus point and shoot knocking around in my backpack. In my first days back, Berlin bloomed at the seams with rotten garbage. Ants crawled out of the sockets in my father's living room, a small street of them, always leading up the wall and out the window. No matter how much poison we sprayed into the electrical outlets or taped them shut, they just returned. And though prophesied to soon be extinct, the bees were also everywhere. They covered the overflowing trash cans in the city, or you'd see them lazily dozing on outdoor cafe tables where they fattened themselves on crumbs of sugar or lay unconscious next to jars of cherry jam. I brushed the dirt out of my hair and rinsed it from my face, and all I could hear, even in the early morning, was the howling of sirens over the frenzied songs of birds, which chirped and chirped and chirped. In August, I enrolled at Humboldt-Universität for philosophy and art history, not because I wanted to study, but because I wanted the free U-Bahn pass. And so I let the glittery, destructive underworld of Berlin sink its fangs into me. My solitude alleviated only when I went out at night and got lost in some apartment with tattooed men and women who did poppers underneath a framed picture of Ulrike Meinhof. Then I went home, my nose bleeding, my hair smelling of cigarette smoke, and was confronted by that disappointed look on my father's face, my grandmother's suspended in a perpetual frown. I had been lifted out of the low-income district of hopelessness and sent to one of the best schools in the country, and yet here I was, my mother was dead. Soon the city would be covered in snow again, and I was ravaged by the hunger to ruin my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Aria. I want to clap, but alone. So there's already quite the seeming contrast in these first few pages, where there is this aliveness. I feel like, especially when you describe summer, there's the ants, there's the birds, there's this organic aliveness, and then at the same time, you talk about melancholy and isolation and the hunger to ruin my life. So I don't know. I feel like maybe that says something about our protagonist, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about her.
Yeah, that's actually quite interesting that it's encapsulated in the beginning already. I don't think I was very conscious of doing that when I wrote the first couple of pages. But when I conceived of Nila as a protagonist, I wanted her to be a combination of opposites, of like this kind of dialectical tension between things that seem disparate. On the one hand, she's filled with so much shame about where she's from, but then and desires to hide herself and conceal herself. And then on the other hand, she has this impulse to overexpose, and to seek out hedonism. She's quite self-destructive and yearns to die, and yet she is filled with a lust for life, really. So I guess I'm just interested in things that seem as though they're not really connected to each other in terms of concept or theory, and then figure out how to combine them. Because I think if you push one thing to the extreme, you usually end up at the opposite of what you started with. And especially for a young person, I think that kind of character is realistic and makes sense. As we older, we make more mistakes, life hurts us, we get blunter. But I think in youth, it's quite common to live through questions that seem extreme and also push yourself to the outermost boundaries, and maybe get hurt along the way. So Neela, as a protagonist to me, was kind of this encapsulation of two opposites. And then the story around her is also one of shedding the old and moving towards progress, because I think the central themes of the novel are tradition versus progress, and revolution versus regression, Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, that's a classic Bildungsroman theme,
Yes.
right? So Nila then pretty early on in the novel, actually, I think maybe on the first pages, meets Marlowe, a toxic man that the New Yorker, in the New Yorker, in the review, he was described as the instrument of her self-destruction, which I liked because he's obviously a terrible boyfriend, but Neela seems quite active in this relationship, almost as if she is using him as an instrument. Not to, like, there's obviously a power dynamic there, and like we're not trying to give her responsibility for what happens, but yeah, she does have some agency in that, and that I find very interesting, that relationship. How did you approach that?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I succeeded in doing that, but I am quite fascinated with relationships that have a certain very obvious power imbalance embedded in them. In this case, it's both age and I guess social or socioeconomic milieu that they come from. But then again, there is a similarity between the two in the sense that they're both foreigners, they're both artists, they both have this tendency to self-destruct or look for intensity in life. So there are things that connect the two, and then at the same time, their positionalities are quite opposite, or disparate, discordant. And I think with this kind of very stereotypical romantic relationship between an older man and a younger woman, that has nothing subversive in itself inherently. She doesn't even have more money than him, like there isn't something that I could use to turn it around. I still wanted to explore how Neela has agency in this relationship and is not just purely victimized, because most of the time when you are at that age in your early 20s or in your late teenage years, she's 18 or 19 at the beginning of the novel. She's not 17, she's not 16, so she's not underage. It's technically a legal relationship. You tend to think that you have it all figured out and that you're more mature than you really are. And as life goes on and time passes, you might realize some of the nuances of the relationship that were not entirely voluntary or were not entirely in your hands. At the same time, I don't want to discount the agency that young people have. They're not, like, at 19, you're not a child anymore. You can make your own decisions. You can vote. In Germany, you can drink and do other things. You can learn, you can drive a car. You can make decisions about what relationships you enter. And in this case, it's in the responsibility of the other person, the older person to be like, no, I am not pursuing a relationship with a 19-year-old. But it also highlights his own immaturity and his own arrested development. I think Marlowe is in a state of arrested development because he's surrounded by a lot of younger people, not just Neela, but also his other friends are at least like 10 or maybe 5 or 6 years younger than him. He's not really surrounded by people his age. And I just wanted to write about it in a very messy and complicated way. Um, I don't think like a black and white morality or an approach to diagnostics or pathologizing fictional characters is the most helpful when you read novels. In real life, I would probably deal with it differently, but I also just wanted to show that she can have desire even in something that is probably objectively a bad experience, if that makes sense. Also, I just want to note how strange it is to speak to you in English right now, because last time we did this, we did it in German, so my brain is really switching.
It's true. Yeah, it's strange. Yeah, I mean, I think you did that beautifully, and I feel like even as a reader, you kind of like lose control with her. So
Yes.
like you take us with her on this journey of
Oh, yes.
being kind of out of control of the experience, which is really well done. Yeah.
The fact that you just said the fact that the mentioning of the out like losing control or out of control or surrendering to like this lack of control or dominance over oneself reminds me of the fact that I just read a student poem. I'm teaching, I'm in my office right now, and that student poem kind of deals with similar issues, and I realized I really enjoyed it because it's reveling in the uncertainty and also in the pleasures of surrender. You know, it might not always be healthy, but you might have chosen it yourself, and that's how addiction starts too. And I think ultimately the dynamic between Marlowe and Neela is one of addiction. I think she's addicted to him, and he's addicted to drugs. So yeah, it's cool. It starts with
Yeah.
pleasure. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we just talked about how much you already tell us in these first few pages, and there's also already apparent the contrast between the life that she had before and then the life she had at boarding school, which is a theme throughout the novel. And at boarding school, she starts lying about her background, and then like going on, she lies with Marlowe and like with her new friends about this. And yeah, I kind of saw it as her lying to gain control over the narrative. And you have an Adorno quote in there that says, "He who has no home will find it in writing." And I was kind of thinking, literature is lying too.
Yes.
And so I guess I'm wondering if is there a way in which Neela is finding a home in these lies, and what happens when then she finally tells the truth.
I love that. I don't know if I had ever thought about it that way. That the lying or the fables she's constructing become a kind of home for her. That's a beautiful way of looking at it. I think they for sure create a haven of safety for her, at least in the beginning, because she yearns to fit in. As we know, she was sent to this boarding school. She got in on a scholarship, and her aunt is helping fund it. And she's from a quite precarious financial background herself, and she wants to fit in so badly and starts fabricating all of these lies about where her parents are from and how much money they earn, which is kind of childish, to be honest. I think children often do this, and you grow out of it because you understand that there is no way of hiding the truth. But Neela has this fantasy that she's carrying into adulthood, that she can keep these worlds separate. And on the one hand, it does give her maybe a kind of temporary home or a safety net, which shields her when she walks through certain rooms in which she is passing as something that she's not. Because she also lies, yeah, she lies that she's not Afghan. She says that she's Greek, so she's passing as European, as Southern European, as an other that isn't Muslim in rooms. And that makes her safe. And I did ask myself, when I finished the novel and when I was revising it, I asked myself, would Nila have lied if her family had been rich? And I think the answer to that is no. I think ultimately the shame she experiences about being othered and disenfranchised comes from the material reality she's growing up in. I think financial security and wealth can give you a sense of pride automatically and a sense of superiority that she's really lacking. And then also another question I ask myself is like, where is this shame actually coming from? Because shame is a universal feeling, right? Everyone experiences it. We experience it when we have made a mistake or we have behaved inadequately and we think we are less than, and we need to apologize. And the fact that she's experiencing shame about her family of origins poses the question as to like, is this an actual mistake? Like, is it pure paranoia and this desire to fit in and therefore erase her origins? Or is there something true to the fact that it could be read as inadequate or a mistake to reveal yourself as Afghan and poor at that time in Germany? And I think the answer to that, within the narrative at least, is like it's kind of both. She is exaggerating it. She's lying more than everyone around her, but on the other hand, there is a real danger to being perceived as a kind of other in certain Western countries. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a great bridge to, I was going to ask you if you can read some more, and I think that maybe the next
Yes.
part you'll read has something to do with that.
I'll be reading from late in the novel. After I'm not going to spoil in case people have not read it yet, but there is some violence, social violence, political violence that is happening within the story. And Nila experiences a kind of political awakening, or the beginning of political awakening at the end of the narrative. And I'm going to read a little bit of that because those were some of my favorite paragraphs to write. 32. Something big happens. Something bigger than you. My mother marches at a student protest in 1984, wearing suede boots, the sun rising over the mountain. Or 70 years earlier, Kafka wakes up and learns that Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. Sunlight moves through the water glass on the nightstand. God comes down to Moses and tells him to refuse the golden calf, to take his children out of Egypt. My great-great-grandfather leaves his tribe on the Iranian border and settles in Afghanistan and says the Shahada. A whistleblower sits in a courtroom, his gaze turned toward a blue book that contains the sentence that will define his fate. Trials are held. The world spins. We send rockets into space, robots that take pictures of planets we have never been to. We write down the law, we amend it, and we define who is good, who bad. Documents are classified, hidden for years. Exile, war, terrorism. A girl brushes her hair and plants a bomb in a cafe in Algeria. I felt no regrets. I did it for my people, she will say from her prison cell. Apocalypsis, which means revelation. The bride removing the veil, turning her face in the direction of the grainy wind, sand fluttering in her eyes. You watch the news. Everything you feared is true. They hate us. You belong, you understand, to the others. You think of Celan's Todesfuge, the image of graves in the sky. You think of Palestine. And then, as always, there is loneliness. A loneliness as old as your childhood. These thoughts passed through me as I stared for 10 minutes at a photograph of my father. He is with his cousins, presumably, though these other men could have been anyone. The picture, taken from the frog's perspective, is backlit, eliciting an aura of darkness. The men are crouched on a hill toward the right. Gray, minimal shrubbery dots the landscape. Only my father looks into the camera. They wear cotton pants and keffiyehs and dismal shawls on their shoulders, one of them holding what I at first glance mistook for a rifle, but as just a camcorder. I kept staring at it, wondering who they were or where it was taken. Then I put the picture back in the notebook where it found it, where years ago I must have left it, either as a note to myself or to hide it. I think I'll stop there. Otherwise,
Thank you so much.
yeah, spoiling.
Before I ask the next question, I just wanted to say if anyone in the audience wants to write a question in the chat box right now, we'll answer them later, just in case it comes up and you wanna have it written down. So yeah, there's a great breadth to the images and events that you write about in the first paragraph of this, which is beautifully written, and it made me think of the luxury that it is to think of politics as something confined to the news or far away or as like historicized as events. And in this passage, it goes a bit on about you situate the novel in the 2010s, kind of by framing it with historical or political events. So there's in 1992, she says she was born right after Rostock-Lichtenhagen, right?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. And then and so, which is, by the way, historicized in Germany as the Baseballschlägerjahre, as if it was ever over.
Yeah.
And then there's the NSU in 2010. So this comes up in the novel as well. And yeah, I guess I was just gonna ask about that, like how you worked with that from a artistic point of view, but also what your thoughts are about all this.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting that, yeah, she is framing her life as like a blip in the historical like timeline in some way, right? Like, oh, this is when this happened politically to foreigners in Germany, and then I was born, and then I'm coming of age just as this other big thing is being revealed, and the violence kind of throughout this time, these 20 years has just been dotting and brewing in the background. And I think part of why Nila is ashamed of where she's from or like lies about where she's from is to also live in this illusion that she's unaffected by these truths and these realities. She wants to push them away. She doesn't want to think about them. It actually annoys her in a typical teenager fashion when her parents or her dad is bringing it up and is trying to politicize everything, or when her friends are talking about Marxism and stuff, because she is so I think inherently politicized in the way she walks through the world, economically, but also socially and religiously, at this time in the post 9/11 Europe that I'm writing about. And in some ways, I think it's just the way I see the world. I feel like I don't know if we've ever been in a time where you could maybe detach yourself a little bit from politics. Maybe in Europe it was the 90s, which seemed like a time of hope, or even the early before we entered the first Obama era, like just as Obama was elected, I think there was like a general sense of hope in the world. And then we instantly had the financial crash and all these other crises popping up. And obviously none of the revolutions that I think we millennials believed in quite worked out the way we thought they would, as in Occupy Wall Street and the Arab Spring and all these other things that are also happening or about to happen in the background of this novel. And I think I'm just interested in simultaneity and how to write that. I might not even have figured it out exactly how to write the way I think I experience the world. That might be my lifelong challenge, to find a way to write that. But I guess I'm never just isolated. I have never had the luxury to experience the world that way. I also don't think it's necessarily a luxury. I think it's like a laziness, or like a type of like selfishness, because you navel gaze, and I experience that within myself, that sometimes there are weeks or sometimes days where I just can't take it anymore, and I want to pretend that the world around me isn't affecting me, but I do believe that everything is connected to each other. And I have like a kind of like a more radical worldview, where I think that like if one person isn't free, no one is free, you know? And in that sense, to bring that across in writing, I think you have to historicize even the lives of fictional characters in some sense. But I think specifically in this book, I was interested in using the Bildungsroman in a very classical way, while also showing that it always takes a political or social event in order to grow up properly and move from one phase into another. But even political awakening or changing politically or experiencing a sense of like radical longing or longing for radicality is something that I'm so interested in. And I always want to track what brings people to change their lives, you know, or like what brings them to give up something that might be seen as luxurious or comfortable and risk their lives for other people, you know, like what brings an individual to join the group or the collective. Yeah.
Very interesting. The book is a Bildungsroman, but it's also a Künstlerroman in a way.
Yes.
And she's a photographer, at least in the beginning. I mean, she says, when I was still a photographer, we're not sure what happens much later. But the scene you just read, there's this kind of blip where she thinks it's a rifle, but it's actually a camcorder. And it made me think of, you know, there's also another place in the book where she says, I'm archiving my life, and made me kind of think made me think of documentation as a sort of weapon. Maybe a political weapon. There's a bell hooks quote that I like, which I wrote down, which is when the psychohistory of a people is marked by ongoing loss, when entire histories are denied, hidden, erased, documentation can become an obsession. And I think that's very interesting. And I wonder if that is something you were thinking about.
I love that quote. I also think it's so relevant right now when we think about what's happening in Palestine and in Gaza specifically, and how so many journalists are being targeted specifically in order to stop the documentation of this infringement on like international law.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are all of these ad hoc journalists, young people who are just documenting everything on social media. There is a democratization of what we consider to be journalism happening at the same time, because the prestige sources are either being killed or not being reliable, whatever it is. It's like we're right now in a very interesting moment when it comes to photography and filming, especially of disasters and of a people who are being actively eradicated. I think there is something related that I was thinking about when I made Nila a photographer, even though she is not a documentarian in the same sense. I think maybe in an ideal world, once she grows up, she becomes less obsessed with the self in this navel gazing way, because she is kind of a navel gazing character, and would go out into the world and photograph other things. For her, I think it's a tool of exerting agency over the world around her. It is true she has a life that is full of ruptures and full of fragmentation, because she grows up in exile and quite literally doesn't have any access to photographs of her family home or her parents as children or whatever. So it becomes a way of filling in the gaps with the gaps of the past with her present and with her future, and leaving a mark on the world. I think all kind of art is that. When we write, we do that. When we make music, we do that. You know, we're trying to create something that lives longer than us, I think, and says that we were here on Earth and is proof of our existence. So she's trying to do that. And then on the other hand, there's also the fact that I think for her, the camera, and especially her self-portraits, are the only place in front of which, like, the camera is the only place in front of which she can be herself, because she's not just lying to her friends and to her lover, she's also lying to her family. So she's constantly wearing this mask. And even though maybe at first it was a kind of like safety haven or a kind of home, it becomes a prison because she can't let anyone else in. And the camera is the first time where she doesn't feel the pressure of someone else's gaze when she's alone in front of it. So her self-portraits are also the best pieces she creates in the novel. And then I'm interested in photography for a variety of reasons. And I think I mentioned it last time we spoke also, that I was reading Walter Benjamin and his like short history on photography, where he talks about these unconscious blips that sometimes occur in photographs, especially in the earliest photographs when people weren't quite aware of how the machine or the technology worked. He poses the question as to whether or not a photograph of that time, an analog photograph, could have contained something that collapses the temporal timeline, you know, like something of the future could be contained psychologically in the subject that is portrayed. And I think she's experimenting with that, especially when she's thinking about her mother's photographs or photographs of her friends and herself. And that's why I made her an analog photographer primarily. So those mistakes can happen more frequently. Yeah.
So, okay, thank you so much for this amazing talk and for your reading. And now we're going to open the floor to everyone. There's already 2 questions in the chat.